He was never meant to love again. She was never meant to survive him. Yet one stolen taste bound their fates and lit a fire the world thought was gone forever. They say vampires were not always cold. Once, before the oldest stones were laid and before the first bell tolled midnight, there were bloodmates, two hearts braided by a vow older than language. When one breathed, the other exhaled. When one bled, the other healed. People whispered that the gods envied such devotion, and the gods do not envy lightly. 1,000 years ago, the last bond burned on a rooftop, a crown of flame too bright to look at. After that, power remained, hunger remained, and politics endured like winter. But love, true love, became a rumor told by firelight to make children shiver. Children grew into parents who repeated the rumor because it made the night behave. Lord Kael had learned to live inside that rumor's absence until it felt less like a wound and more like weather. The mountain accepted him the way it accepts lightning, as a fact, not a welcome. His castle clung to the ridge the way a black bird grips a branch. Towers bit into the sky. Wind combed the parapets and sang one low note that never changed with the centuries. The great hall smoldered with braziers that warmed the light and nothing else. Kael sat on a stone chair that wasn't a throne and turned an unused chalice so the fire made a red wheel in its curve. He listened to the castle breathe. Immortality, he had decided, is not glory. It is silence. A long corridor with doors you no longer open. Outside, winters layered like glass. Inside, nights wrote themselves in narrow script. Sometimes he let the present loosen and the past widen. In those loosenings, he saw the old city again, the one that ended on that rooftop. He remembered the bell tower's shadow lying across roofs like a careful hand, remembered the honey vendor who always overfilled his ladle, remembered, most sharply, laughter that made frost release its hold. He did not remember the woman's face cleanly anymore. The mind is cruel, and the heart edits. He remembered her wrist, the blue vein where he had pressed his mouth, an oath before language. Below the keep, torches moved along the switchback road like a slow-burning snake. Once a decade, the village sent a tribute, because fear is a tradition, even when the reasons for it grow thin. 2 guards led a young woman up the steps between carved griffins. She wore a traveling dress, scrubbed nearly white, cloth shoes scuffed by rock, and a shawl neat enough to show someone had tried. Ash dusted her hem from the baker's oven. Sunlight clung to the ends of her hair as if reluctant to leave. She expected chains. She found stone and quiet, and a man who watched her the way the moon watches the sea, steady, pale, unblinking. "Do you fear me?" Kael asked, not as a cruelty, but as ritual. The hall gathered the sound and returned it to him, ironed flat. "Yes," she said. The honesty cut clean. Then she lifted her chin. "But I will not kneel. The smallest things change weather." His chest, empty house, closed shutters, took a breath it had forgotten how to take. He signaled. A servant appeared with bread and pears. Another opened the shutters so night could breathe into the room. The girl's gaze flicked toward the open dark, then back to him. "What is your name?" he asked. "Isabella." She did not offer a family name. Tributes are meant to be forgotten by those who send them. "You will be lodged in the East Tower," Kael said, voice level, careful. "Eat, sleep. You will come to no harm in these walls." Her mouth shaped a question and swallowed it. She nodded. Servants led her away. Kael kept his eyes on the doorway long after the shadows fitted themselves back together. He did not go after her. He had learned the taste of caution, how it sits on the tongue like snow. Monsters devour girls in stories. Girls bury pins in monsters and live. In Kael's keep, knights wrote themselves in small, precise letters. His court obeyed his quiet. The elders respected him and counted their own teeth. The treaty with the valley held because it had always held. Isabella's first days unfurled like cloth in a patient hand. A maid named Lena, scar tucked into the corner of her mouth like a secret, showed her a bedchamber with a hearth big enough to stand in, a copper tub that smoked like a miracle, 3 dresses that actually fit, and a window that looked east into more mountain. Hot water at dusk, Lena said. Bread at dawn. If you need anything, knock on the post twice. If you need me, knock 3. Thank you, Isabella said, because manners hold in a storm. In the mornings, she walked the outer galleries and counted ravens arranged like punctuation along the roofline. At noon, she found the library, 3 stories of books strapped in old leather, a ladder that sighed when it slid, windows that drank the thin mountain light. The air had the dusty warmth of paper and the persistent ghost of pine smoke. The first volume she chose turned out to be sermons in a language she didn't know. The second, a play about a woman who loved a river so much she drowned on purpose. The third, a history of bridges. She touched spines the way some people touch prayer beads. Sometimes, when she stared too long out the glass, memories crowded in. The village square in summer, rilled with heat. The teacher's chalk crumbling into a powder that clung to his cuffs. The dog with one ear ragged and one eye ridiculous, who followed children as if they had a plan. The potter's songs, always a little flat, always sung as if someone better might come along and he wanted to be ready. Her mother's hands worrying bread dough smooth. Isabella had thought her life small and neat, a room that could be swept in a morning. Now it felt like a little chest left open, and wind had fingers. Kael avoided her and was always near. She would glance up to find his shadow long at the corridor's end. In the library, when she reached too high for a green-bound book, a steady hand braced the ladder, then withdrew. Once, she heard him pause outside her door and not knock. The castle learned her footfall, and he learned it with the castle. He told himself it was nothing. He had mastered nothing for so long it had become an art. He could be a wall for 10 nights, 10 months, 100 years. He could let the world pass like winter rain and only notice it as a sound on the roof. Then a trivial thing broke the glass. A goblet slipped. It struck the table's edge and cracked. A red half-moon leapt across the wood. Isabella gathered shards with the tidy focus of someone who cannot afford waste. A sliver found her thumb. Blood swelled bright and perfect. Kael stepped into the doorway because he had been walking by too often. The scent met him and narrowed the world to a single point, so small it might have been a star. He should have left. He had left 1,000 rooms with 1,000 smaller invitations in them. He did not leave this one. "Let me," he said, voice wrong, rougher, human. He took her wrist, turned the thumb toward the light. One drop crowned and trembled. It fell. He moved without permission. Fang brushed skin. Blood met tongue. Fire. Not the kind that devours. Not yet. The kind that brings a body back from a cold river. He felt it strike the center of his chest, as if someone had laid a brand there and asked it to sing. Sight doubled. This room and another one cracked open like a seed. He saw a staircase burning and 2 figures crossing in smoke. He saw a city's eaves frosted with winter and laughter open enough to warm them. He saw a man kneel in snow and press his forehead to a woman's wrist as if prayer had returned to him after a long absence. Isabella swayed. It should have been fear-dashing ice down her spine. Instead, the sensation felt like stepping to a cliff's edge and realizing the wind under you has hands. Kael tore himself back. He set his palms on the table and left prints he did not see. "No," he said, "to hunger, to memory, to the ribbon of heat unfurling in a house that had learned to be cold." She held her hand away from her dress and stared at the bead of blood like a jewel. "What did you—" She stopped. Her heart, which had trotted most days obediently, took to running like a released hound. That night, she dreamed strange and woke stranger. A map hovered on the inside of her eyelids, the mountain's veins of water threading through stone, a stag stepping out where no grass grew. A bell cracked, and rehung crooked. She woke with tears drying and could not say whether they were grief or relief. She pressed her ear to the wooden beam and heard the castle sound like a ship at sea. Kael did not sleep. Vampires call their day's rest sleep because there's no better word for closing your eyes and waiting for the sky to move. He lay beneath a ceiling that had watched 5 lords die of boredom and 2 of fashion, and stared until the stone swam. "It cannot be," he told the dark. The dark had years in it and declined to argue. The bond did not request permission to continue. When he nicked his palm during drilling, careless, distracted, Isabella hissed 3 floors below and clutched her hand as if the pain had passed between walls. When Lena made a joke about the bell and the baker that wasn't very good, Isabella laughed and discovered he was smiling alone in an armory as if he'd remembered a good day. When she pressed her palm to the east window and thought of the village, the rag-eared dog, the chalk, the potter's song, Kael felt something warm take a chair in the empty room behind his ribs. He went to her door at dusk 2 nights later because the castle's quiet had turned from balm to itch. He stood where the east tower's shadow cut him into careful halves. "You don't understand," he said. His self-control had edges again, and it hurt to hold. "I understand enough," Isabella said. She folded a blanket and set it square on the bed, the kind of tidy you do when the world is untidy. "Someone touched me, and the universe noticed. There are those who will kill you for existing," he said, and the words tried to come out kind and failed because fear ruins grammar. They believe the bond breaks kings, makes nations bleed. They remember one city that burned and forgot the 1,000 that were saved. Her gaze met his. "Then hide me better," she said, and then quietly stubborn, "or stand with me." He took a step toward her because every part of him had opinions. He left because the part that rules had learned when to turn its back on rooms where it wanted to stay. The elders convened in a room without windows, where candles never guttered and the walls smelled of polished stone and old plans. 8 of them, older than treaties and fashions and some languages. They held power the way men hold their breath to keep from crying. They took the rumor in their hands and turned it like a blade in light. "The bond is a weakness," hissed one whose name had been worn thin by centuries into a sound like a knife scabbard. "It makes rulers into fools. We barely survived it last time." "Kill the girl," murmured another. "Love is a weed. Pull it before the roots take the wall." Kael folded his hands so he would not reach for anyone's throat. "You will not touch her." "Then you doom us," said the knife. "The hunters will smell this. They have waited at the foot of every story for a misstep. Give them a tremor. They will bring their bells." "The bond did not doom us," Kael said, and the old anger that had no place to live until now found a chair. "Envy did. Cowardice did. Our habit of calling fear prudence and loneliness wisdom did." "Fine words," said the gentlest elder without kindness. "Will you take responsibility when torches string themselves along your walls like a new constellation?" "I will take responsibility," he said. "For her. For you, if I must. For what comes." They did not decide. Elders prefer to let the world decide and call it vision. Hunters did not wait. Rumor walked on legs stronger than truth and carried sharper knives. In cellars, men traced circles in chalk and crossed them out to prove they did not believe in circles. In chapels, candles were snuffed as if hope owed a debt and could be made to pay by darkness. Along roads, bootprints multiplied until they looked like a language the ground had learned. The siege began on a night made for walking. Dry air, a wind that carried smoke away from faces, stars crisp enough to use for counting. The bell, silent for decades, coughed, then found its voice. Arrows lifted like impatient meteors and wrote new brief constellations on stone. Isabella could not sleep. The library had become the only room that felt full. She ran a finger along a map's ink river and tried to imagine water making a decision. The first thud came up through her heels. The second arrived with grit from the ceiling. Lena appeared in the doorway as if the castle had spoken her name. "Stay," Lena said. "If the worst comes, into the chimney. Yes, with the soot." Another blow. The fire took an old banner with relief. It had been waiting to be an excuse for years. Smoke laid a hand on the back of Isabella's neck. She pushed a heavy table across the door alone and learned how strong fear makes you. The door gave way with a sound like a tree dodging thunder and failing. 3 hunters came in gray with ash and belief. Isabella raised the iron book hook because it was what she owned. The first man misjudged her. Her swing taught him precision. The second used the opening and put a knife in her side, not smart enough to kill, just cruel enough to hope. Kael, 2 corridors away, folded around a pane that wasn't his and was. He put a hand on the stones because the floor had turned to water. The bond held, not gentle, but held, and he poured breath through it as through a bellows. He broke the library door the way weather breaks plans. Compulsion made the third man's arm forget how to lift. Kael was beside Isabella before breath could turn into a word. "No," he said to the wound, to the story, to everything that had always ended in flame before. "You should let me go," she said, astonishingly calm, the way bodies get when they begin to argue with the rules of staying. "I was never meant for your mountain." "Fate keeps its counsel," he said. "So do I." He opened his wrist with a sure old gesture and pressed it to her mouth. She refused first because pride does that. Then she tasted him and remembered what thirst means. Iron, yes, but something warm beneath it, like honey that had been set by a fire and stirred. Heat ran from her tongue to her chest and then lit every window of the house that was her body. Her heart stuttered, stopped, started again in a new rhythm that thrilled and scared and fit. The change did not feel like dying. It felt like opening, like lifting a lid and finding the world you had always suspected hidden in the bottom. The room brightened and then dimmed, not with light, but with detail, threads in tapestry, breath between heartbeats, a noise like the mountain dreaming. Her wound cooled, then warmed, then sealed with a tight, clean ache. She breathed once like a swimmer surfacing, and when her eyes opened, the pupils were thin and the ring around them gold, as if someone had painted truth on them while she slept. "Isabella," Kael said, and he did not command. He came home. The hunters did not disappear because one girl stopped bleeding. Bells rang in the courtyard because men like cymbals, even when they shake. Elders filed into the hall like night gathering in corners. They watched Kael lift Isabella. They did not bless. They did not forbid. The world had decided without them. Words broke against what came next. The castle's narrow corridors turned fights into arguments you had to win with the weight of your whole body. Kael moved like a man, using a language he had learned before he learned words. Isabella moved with him. Bodies remember faster than minds. If he was a door, she was the key. If he was a blade, she was the hand that turns it true. Twice she caught a wrist before it could find his throat. Once he dragged a spear from a man's hands and used it for a staff because sometimes you need a walking stick to cross a river of violence. At the library window, an archer set flame to a second arrow and swallowed fear like bread. Isabella raised her hand without thinking. The glass trembled and then snowed inward, the arrow's path confused into harmless sparks. She stared at her hand as if it had told a joke. "Later," she whispered to the trick, half laughing, half horrified. "You can explain yourself later." By dawn, the courtyard looked like a story that had learned better. Torches lay too far from their owners. The bell hung crooked and would be left that way on purpose. Hunters who could walk walked away. Those who could not were led, because Lena said even enemies deserved knees and water. Kael stood beneath the arch with ash in his hair. He looked very old, which is different than looking tired. It is the honesty of having lived long enough to have earned it. Isabella stood with one palm on the stone and felt the mountain's blood slide under her hand, cold and slow. "This proves nothing," said the knife elder softly. "You saved a girl and made a war." "This proves everything," Kael said. "I saved my mate and made a home." The gentle elder's eyes weighed her as if generosity could be a form of measurement. "Hunters will come again. They always do. They have good boots and stubborn prayers." "Then we'll be ready," Isabella said, surprising them all, including herself. Her voice held the memory of chalk and herbs and river mud. "Fear has had enough to eat up here. Let hope have a bowl." They did not exile the elders. Elders do not admit they can be exiled. They did not kneel to them either. Something in the castle's balance shifted the way a chair shifts when you move it closer to the fire so someone you love will be warm. Day narrowed to a slit, then widened into evening. Isabella woke into her second night with a thirst that sang rather than shouted. Lena put a cup in her hands. "Eat, idiot," she said softly, and laughed through tears she pretended were steam. The taste was new, metal and mulled wine, rosemary, and something like memory. Isabella drank and did not apologize for liking it. She learned to feed without cruelty, how to decline with a smile when decline was kinder, how to stop before hunger mistook taking for love. She practiced on deer with Kael's hand steadying her shoulder, then on her own with Kael watching from far enough away to let her learn and close enough to catch her if learning bent her knees. She hated hurting anything. She loved not dying. Both truths sat together and did not argue. She learned other gifts too. How a whisper carries along a stone corridor and finds ears that need it. How the wall remembered which children had carved initials into its base and would show her if she asked with her palm. How sound can be a rope. She tugged a bell inside the dawn chapel without hands. The priest, alone, crossed himself and then laughed, because sometimes a miracle is a joke the world tells to keep you trying. At the next council they met in the chapel, because even those who do not pray understand the usefulness of a room where people have tried to for a long time. Candles fattened the air with beeswax. The frescoes were cracked, the saints' faces rubbed thin by lips that believed and lips that wanted to. The elders assembled with their dignified sort of hunger, the kind that eats certainty. "Hunters will test us," the gentle elder said. "They will send a scout, then a squad, then a priest with a clever box. They always do." "Then we will test ourselves first," Kael said. "We will build what they can't burn." "With her?" the knife elder asked without looking at Isabella, as if women vanish if you don't make eye contact. "At your side, where every arrow finds its argument?" "With my mate," Kael said, and the word rolled like a bell into corners that had never heard it. "Not behind me, not in front of me, with me." Isabella touched the backs of his fingers because touch is the plainest language. "I'm not a burden," she said. "I'm a choice." They argued until candles leaned. Elders like to stand at the edge of a cliff and hold a conference about gravity. In the end, nothing was written and everything was decided anyway. The keep's doors no longer opened simply because an elder wished it. They stuck and made them knock like everyone else. Lena said the castle had better manners than most lords. On the 7th night after the siege, a lone hunter came as far as the old mill and watched the keep through a spyglass. Isabella saw him from the parapet and tasted the flat tin of his fear. "Let him go," she said. "We can't eat an entire world." Kael snorted and said he had never been tempted. On the 20th, a squad tested the western gate. They found it open, decided it was a trap, and left. On the 40th, a priest sent a letter folded like a bird, delivering a blessing and a warning and an invitation to parley. Kael sent the bird back with rosemary tied to its ankle and a note. "Your blessing is accepted. Your warning is not. Your invitation can be amended to dinner if you can stand rare meat." The priest laughed alone and kept the letter in his pocket. because not all stories end in fire. Isabella asked to go down to the village when the moon was kind. Kael kept his hands where old women could see them and said good evening like a man who had learned what it feels like to be welcomed. Children stared and then giggled when Lena produced sugared almonds as if she were a lesser saint. Isabella stood at the schoolhouse door and touched scratches a bored child had carved. "I belong here." She whispered, "You do." And then they walked back up with the rag-eared dog following them halfway before remembering he had a job. Life is not trumpets every morning. It is dishes and mended cloaks and maps refolded and arguments about whether the bell should be rehung straight. Lena demanded crooked. Kael said crooked was honest. Isabella said crooked rang truer. Crooked won. Sometimes the bond surprised them, quick, bright exchanges like notes passed under a table. Isabella would smile at a line in a book and feel his mouth answer the shape of her smile in another room. Once Kael cut a rose on the inner court's bush and pricked his thumb. Isabella, down in the cellars, jerked her hand back from a crate and scolded no one. "Stop that." Lena nearly dropped a basket laughing. On a night when fog braided itself around the battlements, Kael took her to the high balcony where wind likes to tell long stories. The valley lay black-green and silver. The world smelled like wet bark and cold iron, and the first stupid flower trying too early and getting away with it. "For 1,000 years, Kael said, not as an oath this time, just as a fact the mountain could keep for them, "I learned not to want." "And now," she said, forehead resting against his cheekbone. "And now I want," he said. "Not crowns, not songs, rooms with your books in them, bells that ring crooked, bread that tastes like rosemary because Lena went mad with herbs, villagers who stop being afraid of their own courage, a future that is not just a lack of ending." She took his hand and laced fingers. "Then let's make that," she said, slowly, on purpose. They made lists like people who had finally found a table, repair the south stair, invite the priest to dinner, teach the children that wolves have jobs and so do people, plant rosemary and ash because Lena said it blessed everything it could reach, pay the baker twice for the rolls he underpriced out of stubbornness. The hunters returned at midsummer with better boots and a priest who really did have a clever box, oak, bound in iron, carved with sigils like warnings written by a careful hand. They assembled in the lower meadow where the fog lingered as if curious. Parley, not blood. Kael went with open hands. Isabella went with a closed cloak and open eyes. The priest was young enough to remember play and old enough to have practiced not remembering. "Lord Kael," he said, bowing just enough to keep the peace in his own chest. "Lady." "Isabella," she said, "I am not a lady as your songs define it. I am a person as my mother insists." Then, Isabella. The priest touched the clever box as if it might answer for him. "We have a problem that looks like you and may be you, and a promise that looks like him and may be him, and a history that looks like a lit fuse." "Lit fuses can be pinched," Lena muttered behind them, pretending to check a basket. "What do you want?" Kael asked simply. "To not lose another city to a story," the priest said. "To not teach children to be brave only in dying. To not forget that blessings turn to bludgeons when fear is steering." "Then learn with us," Isabella said. "But don't bring a box to a table and call it trust." He looked at the box and then at her. He opened it. Inside, a bell clapper, small, iron, worn smooth by other worries. "A token," he said, "to show that sometimes a bell is quieter without its tongue." Kael laughed, a surprised, weary sound that startled birds from grass. They ate in the meadow, bread with rosemary, cheese that broke neatly, wine that argued amicably with the air. The hunters who had expected death ate like men stealing peaches. Some of them smiled. Some could not yet remember how. The elders disliked this turn toward talking. They called it capitulation and said the word as if it tasted of ashes. The knife elder visited Kael in a corridor where echo turned whisper into rumor. "You think love will save you," he said. "It will make you stupid." Kael's mouth twitched. "Perhaps," he said, "but I have lived cleverly for centuries, and cleverness is an excellent tool for building cages." "You will make us mortal," the elder hissed. "I will make us human," Kael said, "which is what we were before we learned to be only teeth." When storms came, they came like guests, announced by far-off thunder and the smell of rain traveling ahead to ask if anyone needed anything. In such weather, they held feasts beneath the covered walk. Children from the village stared with eyes like saucers and fed bread to ravens who pretended indifference and stole anyway. Isabella told stories that used to be about saints and now were also about stubborn women who started with nothing and ended with something like a garden. Kael added footnotes from old wars that sounded, in his mouth, like jokes about bad decisions made by men in excellent boots. Not every night was gentle. Once, a pair of zealots tried the north wall with grappling hooks and prayers. Isabella met them halfway, quiet as snow. She took no blood. She took their certainty and replaced it with doubt. Doubt can be kinder than mercy. They left with their ropes and a letter from Lena reminding them to eat better. Sometimes Isabella missed the simple cruelty of hunger. It is a clear command. The complicated kindness of living asks more. She and Kael learned to translate the bond into ordinary choices. He taught her chess because it tends the mind. She taught him the village's rude rhymes because they tend the heart. Winter tried to make a palace of the world again. Snow layered itself on the parapets and softened every hard intention. The keep went quiet in the way of houses full of content work, mending, cooking, reading with legs tucked up under a shared blanket. Isabella sometimes woke to find Kael reading her book upside down because he had been watching her sleep instead of turning pages. He claimed the book made more sense that way. She accused him of sentimentality. He confessed. On the first clear night after a run of storms, the moon rose late and sulking. The air had that sharpness that reminds bones of being young. Kael and Isabella walked the inner court. Their breath did not smoke. Their words did. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. "Before me. The quiet." "Sometimes," he said, "because honesty is a gift you give or you don't deserve what follows it. Sometimes I miss being no one's. Sometimes I miss the kind of clean that comes from rooms with nothing in them. But then you laugh, or you frown at me with your whole face, or you read me a line and it makes the stone listen, and I think, the quiet was saving itself for this." She bumped his shoulder with hers. "You are worse at poetry than you think," she said, smiling, "which is how you say thank you when the thing is too large for the word." Spring came with mud and foolishness. The river shrugged off its ice and ran like a child. The valley looked like someone had thrown a green shawl over a bruise. Lena declared a fair in the lower court. Banners appeared from trunks where mice had offered opinions. The baker brought sugar tarts he could not afford to give and gave anyway. Kael insisted on paying him twice. Isabella insisted on stealing the third tart from Kael's plate. Lena insisted everyone drink water. The knife elder insisted on frowning. The castle insisted on sun. That night, when lanterns swung like small moons and music found legs, Isabella stood beneath the crooked bell and touched its iron with her knuckles. Kael joined her. The sound was soft, not the kind that summons armies. The kind that tells a child, supper is ready. "We did not end," she said. "No," he agreed. "We began again. On the ridge, beyond the boundary where the mountain pretends not to care, figures watched. Not hunters, not tonight. Old women with the posture of trees, men with faces the river had carved. They watched as one watches the proof of a theory one had been too tired to test. One woman spat into her palm and made the sign for warding, then for blessing, then for luck, because it cost nothing to be generous. The priest returned once with a different box. He opened it and showed nothing inside. "To prove I can arrive empty-handed," he said. Kael gave him bread. Isabella taught him a rude rhyme. He left smiling and came back a month later with a petition signed by people who had decided not to be afraid today. Time is a weaver who does not ask permission. Threads crossed, a village baby born with a howl like a trumpet, an elder who discovered that laughter does not kill you. Lena's rosemary growing with the arrogance of saints. Disappointments arrived too, a drought that turned grass mean, a fire that ate nothing important and therefore ate the part of the map where Kael used to store his poor opinions. They kept going. Lovers do not defeat the world, they withstand it. One evening, a boy brought a message from the valley school. The chalk dust had gotten into the teacher's lungs, and he coughed like a dog. Isabella went down and cleaned the slate with a wet cloth, and a story about a city that had once tried to outlaw laughter, but had failed because laughter does not ask for permits. The children loved it and asked for the wolf's part again. Kael taught them how to tell real wolves from men who pretend to be them. The rag-eared dog slept through the lesson, which meant he already knew. Summer swelled the berries until even the birds seemed drunk. Kael and Isabella lay in the thin shade beside the inner well and talked about useless things on purpose. Which star had the most foolish name, whether bread should have seeds, if ravens know jokes, or only accidents that look like jokes. He said he wanted to grow old with her in a way the world could not measure. She said they already were. On a night when the wind came from the north smelling of iron and rain, a messenger from the hunters arrived alone and limping. He looked like a man whose boots had eaten his feet. "I am not your friend," he said simply, "but I am tired of nightmares." "Sit," Isabella said, and he sat because her voice had the same effect as a chair appearing. He told them about a faction growing in the south that wanted to relight the old rooftop, men who believed fire could teach love to behave. He told them about a boy who'd been told to hate and had found himself laughing instead at a fair where a vampire lord ate too many rolls to prove something. "Tell your boy he is welcome at our table if he brings better jokes than your priest," Kael said. The messenger smiled despite himself. In their room afterward, Isabella leaned her forehead against the cool glass. "The world is trying," she said. "It is," Kael agreed. "So are we." They stood there until the window fogged with a condensation that did not belong to their lungs and belonged entirely to their lives. Autumn curled the leaves into small fists and then opened them on the ground. The harvest fair returned because good ideas recur. Children dressed as saints and wolves and a bell. Lena judged pies with a ruthlessness that made grown men blush. The gentle elder brought a single jar of honey and set it like an offering. "I remembered," he said, "something sweet that did not cost me anything I should not have paid." "Keep remembering," Isabella told him. He did. When the first frost found the rosemary and did not kill it, Lena stood with arms folded like a general surveying a defended city. "See," she said to anyone within earshot. "Blessed." Isabella learned she could call small things across small distances. A book, a memory, a name that had been lost under a pile of days. She never called blood. She never called pain. She and Kael learned what to leave alone. That, too, is a kind of power. On a late night, moon reluctant and wind indecisive, they climbed to the high balcony. The valley lay quiet as a listening animal. Somewhere below, someone was burning onions badly enough to teach a lesson. Somewhere, a child pledged to stay out of the woods and meant it until next week. Somewhere, an elder poured wine and told himself the story had turned just as he had planned. Somewhere, the priest spoke the blessing that begins, "May your enemies grow foolish and your friends grow bold." "For 1,000 years, Kael said, a smile in the words, "I told myself I didn't believe in this." "And now?" Isabella asked, as if the question hadn't been asked and answered a dozen times in a dozen rooms with a dozen different kinds of light. "And now I believe in us," he said simply. They leaned their foreheads together. The wind tried to take the moment and failed. If the gods were listening, perhaps they envied something quieter now. Not conquest or miracles, but two figures in the honest dark, not legend or warning or lesson, just people making a life at the edge of a story that had learned to be kind. The crooked bell hung against the sky like punctuation that declared the sentence would go on. And it did. Through winters and fairs, through stubborn prayers and better boots, through rosemary defying frost and laughter defying history, through the long, ordinary miracle of not burning, but living. And when night turned its face toward morning and the wind decided at last which direction meant mischief, Lord Kael and Isabella, bloodbound and chosen, stood where stone meets sky and felt the keep breathe with them. They did not thank destiny, because destiny claims too much credit. They thanked each other. Then they went back inside, where work was waiting and bread was rising and Lena was ready to scold and saints were smudged thin by hope. The age of true vampire love, people had said, was over. People say many things until the world proves them wrong. Then they say they always knew. The age of true vampire love, people had said, was over. People say many things until the world proves them wrong. Then they say they always knew. This time it did not end in flame. It went on, in crooked bells and laughter, in rosemary blooming where ash once lay, in the quiet miracle of not burning, but living. But in the valleys below, whispers still gathered. Hunters were already sharpening their clever boxes, and elders plotted in silence, waiting for the bond to stumble. Kael and Isabella stood together at the edge of night, blood-bound and chosen, knowing the world would test them again. They were not afraid, for they had found each other, and if the world demanded war, then they would meet it together. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching.